Time to talk some Pitt basketball with our Pitt Hoops beat reporter, Kevin Gorman. Back from the Pete. He and the Junkman sitting courtside last night for Pitt 79, Maryland 59. He's with us here on TribLIVE Radio. By the way, the Kevin Gorman Show, Fridays at 2 p.m., right here on TribLIVE Radio. How are you, Gormy?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for hustling up for us here in studio. What did you make of what biggest takeaways from last night's win? Guy and I were talking about the manner in which they won, and one thing that's thrown around or was a question in the postgame was about Pitt out-physicaling Maryland and maybe taking their will to compete away. But do you sense that, or is this a different Pitt team that's not really the old-school Pitt that we know that's just going to out-muscle teams?
No, and I think what it's interesting because that keeps coming up. That was a theme after the North Carolina State game as well. Wolfpack coach Mark Gottfried said they just out-toughed us. And what I'm sensing is this is not a physical team that pushes teams around, although I don't think these ACC teams are accustomed to Big East style of play. And as much as we've downplayed ACC style versus Big East style because these conferences are so big and so varied that the coaches are defensive saying there isn't a style of play. But I do think the Big East is a more physical conference. I think their officials let them get away with more. Mark Turgeon last night talked about how driving the lane is very difficult against Pitt because they get a lot of reach-ins, they get a lot of little bumps, and these teams are used to getting those calls, and they're not getting them right now because Pitt's not hand-checking. That's what the officials are checking. You're really focusing on is the hand-checking. But what I'm sensing is this Pitt team is wearing teams down by continuing to run the ball, to continuing to play at an up-tempo. They're not playing at an up-tempo pace in terms of high scoring or even when I say run the ball, they're not going out and getting tons of points in transition. This is not a fast break team, but this is a team that can run all day, and they have depth, and they had one player out of the 11 who can't run the floor, and that was Joseph Uchiebo, who's coming off a knee injury. I mean, everybody else can get out there and run the floor, and I think that's how they're wearing teams down, is that they're making them work on defense by working the clock, and that wears you down defensively. But I think also that this is a team that can score in transition. This is a team that can play physical, although I don't think it's anywhere near the teams like even DeJuan Blair's team in terms of physical presence.
I think when people think about physical basketball, they think almost in terms of defense. I think they're kind of physically offensively. They crushed them in the paint last night, especially in the first half. I mean, it was only 6 points at halftime, but I think the first half points in the paint were 22-4 or something like that.
Yeah.
For the game, and I think that's where, like Kevin said, I think you can be a physically offensive team, and that's not where you normally think of it. The rebounding has been a little bit. I think that those are numbers he'd like to see improved. I said to him earlier before you came, Kev, it used to be it was like turnovers in football. If you looked at the box score, you could tell who won by the turnovers. With Pitt, it was almost that way with rebounds. Not quite so much the case now.
No, I don't think this team's a great rebounding team, and I think as much as Jamie Dixon harps on it, I think he knows now that, before he wanted to win by a 10 or 15 margin. Now I think he's like, hey, we can't lose. We can't lose the rebounding game. That's so much upon what they're built. But I see this as a team that, even last night, I think I tweeted this last night, Pitt was up 36-30 at halftime, and they missed 3 back ends of the free throws where they could have had a 3-point play. They also missed a couple layups. Right there, that turns a 6-point lead into a 9-point lead and perhaps even a double-digit lead if they just make a couple baskets that were gimmies. And that's where I think you're seeing that is when they stop making those type of mistakes, even against NC State. They came out and shot something like 9 of 27 from the field in the first half. And we were saying, well, what was so wrong in the first half? And they said, we were missing our shots. As soon as we started making our shots, we started winning the game. And I think it's very simple to Pitt, at least in terms of the way.
I think you were there last night when I asked Durant Johnson, Jamie was complaining about shot selection in the first game. I said, is shot selection is it a good shot when it goes in and a bad shot when it doesn't? He laughed and he said, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, Durant kind of, he's one of those shooters without a conscience. You know, he's one of those guys, if you give him an inch, he's taking it and he's going to go up for it. And he has a picture-perfect jumper. But I liked what Jamie Dixon said about him, is that he's kind of had to convince Duran that he has other things to his game, that he's not just a guy who's, you know, a three-point shooter. I don't think he's a guy who's going to beat you off the dribble, but he's certainly shown the ability to slash to the basket and score that way. He's also a guy who is getting some rebounds, is getting some steals on defense, and is setting up teammates, which is the last two games he's had a couple of assists each game. So I think that's another thing. When you look at the bench points, I think Pitt only outscored Maryland 31-29. So, you know, Maryland had a couple guys come off the bench and do some damage as well. But when I look at what Duran Johnson did, he didn't just score. He did a lot of other things, and that frees other guys to do some things too. I mean, all of a sudden when they're having to switch their focus to a backup small power forward or small forward, that all of a sudden allows, you know, some other part of your game to develop.
Maryland had some size too in terms of rebounding. Sometimes it's just I'm trying to see what did.
Yeah, I mean, Shaquille Clear had 4 rebounds.
6'9". That's all he had. I mean, geez,
they're two big
had
men were both like 250, 260.
Well, I had a long-time Pitt observer say to me last night, he thinks this is one of the fastest teams. He's been watching them since Don Hennon, but overall team speed, one of the fastest teams they've ever had. Do you agree with that?
I don't know if I'd say they're fast. I just like that they can run. I think they have some guys that are fast. But I mean, like when I say they can run, Lamar Patterson's not what you would call fast, but Lamar Patterson can get out on the break and finish. You know, and that's a good thing to have a guy like that, especially when they went with basically a 4-guard offense at one point in the